China is a major campaign issue, and Trump and Biden are saying the other is weak. So where do the candidates stand? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode has been sponsored by Surfshark. You should be using a VPN, like Surfshark, to protect your identity whenever you go online. So, there are only 2 weeks left until the election. And the biggest foreign policy issue in this presidential race is China. A lot is on the line. The Chinese Communist Party is an authoritarian regime, one that has, in some ways, surpassed the U.S. military. And they have been very clear that they want to use that military to invade Taiwan, a U.S. partner. And beyond issues of trade deficits and intellectual property theft, the Chinese Communist Party has shown a frightening ability to influence American free speech. The NBA has censored Americans on American soil for fear of losing the China market. American media routinely self-censors for fear of losing the China market. And major U.S. companies have lobbied the White House to go soft on China for fear of losing the China market. I wish they'd all be just a little more concerned about losing the American market. But among individual Americans and people around the globe, unfavorable views of China are at a historic high, which is why part of the 2020 election season has been Trump and Biden arguing the other is weak on China. I guess you could say they do agree on something. No, I don't mean that they agree that the other person is weak. I mean they agree that being tough on China is good. Before Donald Trump was elected, he had said China was cheating the U.S. on trade. But he was also weirdly positive towards China.
I like China. I love China. I love China.
But after getting elected, he put a number of tariffs on Chinese goods, some as high as 25%. In an effort to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. And he labeled China a currency manipulator. It briefly looked like the Trump administration might roll back some of the tariffs after the U.S. and China signed a Phase 1 trade deal. Can you believe that was only back in January of this year? But it turns out when the trade deal was signed, the coronavirus outbreak was already spreading from China to the rest of the world. And since the coronavirus, Trump seems to have doubled down on China.
We're not happy about China, I will tell you that. So right now I'm not interested in talking to China about another deal.
Trump has even threatened to completely decouple the U.S. economy from China, which made Wall Street break out in a nervous sweat. And the Trump administration closed the Chinese consulate in Houston because it was being used for spying. On the human rights front, Trump has signed bipartisan legislation to support democracy in Hong Kong and to protect the Uyghur Muslims from the Chinese regime's human rights violations. And the Trump administration has already used both of those laws to sanction officials for the crackdown in Hong Kong and for the mass detention of the Uyghurs. And geopolitically, the Trump administration has made a big effort to strengthen Indo-Pacific alliances to counter the growing threats from China. And back in May, the Trump administration announced a new U.S. strategic approach to China. The document talks about a fundamental reevaluation of U.S. strategy on China, saying the United States now acknowledges and accepts the relationship with the PRC as the CCP has always framed it internally, one of great power competition. And Trump administration officials, like Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, have made a series of speeches calling out the Chinese Communist Party and saying that the U.S. will not go back to the blind engagement policies of the past. So the Trump administration has started a fundamental shift in how the U.S. deals with China. And that would continue under a second Trump term. But what would a Biden administration do about China? Well, we have a lot to talk about, and we'll begin after this short break. Welcome back. How has presidential candidate Joe Biden talked about China? Well, things have changed since Biden was vice president. Like I said earlier, Most Americans have a more negative view of China than before. So how Biden has talked about China has changed too. Biden told the Council on Foreign Relations that he would double down on Trump's sanctions over the Hong Kong security law and its detention of up to 1 million minority Uyghurs. Not sure exactly what that means in practice, since the sanctions are already quite tough. But maybe Biden will make them double tough, like going from bounty to brawny. The Biden campaign platform also promises to maintain the U.S. lead in technology and to confront Beijing's efforts to erode that edge through cyber attacks, forced technology transfers, and luring American-trained scientists to work in China. Biden agrees with Trump that China is a strategic competitor, not a strategic partner, as it was considered during the Obama administration.
Do you view China as an opponent? Because the president says you've been too cozy with China, too accepting of them in the international community.
I'm not the guy. Look, China, we now have a larger trade deficit with China than we've ever had with China. And in our administration, when the World Trade Organization he keeps going on about just ruled that his trade policy violated the World Trade Organization. We went to the World Trade Organization 16 times.
Do you view China as an opponent?
I view China as a competitor.
Biden says he views China as a competitor now. I mean, after the coronavirus, no one in 2020 is going to say the Chinese Communist Party are the good guys. Granted, in 2019, some people might have disagreed.
China is going to eat our lunch? Come on, man. They can't even figure out how to deal with the fact that they have this great division between the China Sea and the mountains in the west. They can't figure out how they're going to deal with the corruption that exists within the system. I mean, they're not bad folks, but guess what? They're not competition for us.
And that's going to be the biggest challenge facing current Joe Biden. Can he convince Americans he'll be tough on China moving forward, despite the words and actions of past Joe Biden? In his defense, for decades, the think tanks and political circles were almost all saying that America has to engage with China. Doing business with China is what will transform it into a democracy. Now obviously, hindsight is 20/20, especially in 2020. We know more about the Chinese Communist Party now. The coronavirus, the suppression of Hong Kong, the concentration camps for Uyghurs. So in 2020, we've definitely learned some things about the Chinese Communist Party. Although, long before 2020, we should have already known about the Communist Party stealing hundreds of billions of dollars worth of U.S. intellectual property, breaking most of the trade promises it made to the WTO, and of course, the party's ethnic cleansing in Xinjiang and Tibet, and their killing of Falun Gong practitioners for their organs. But I mean, as of 2019, we had no idea they were the bad guys.
They're not bad folks.
Okay, many people were stupid on China in the past. But surely Biden can at least admit he was naive back then.
Do you think in retrospect that you were naive about China?
No.
Okay. So during the 36 years Joe Biden was a U.S. Senator and the 8 years he was Vice President, what was his stance on China that he says he was not naive about? Well, as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in the year 2000, Biden voted yes on the bill to give China permanent normal trade status. Here's what Biden said on the floor of the Senate about why he was voting yes.
Our course is clear. China's growing participation in the international community over the past quarter century has been marked by growing adherence to international norms in the areas of trade, security, and human rights.
And wherever a brake might have been applied, by placing human rights or labor conditions, Biden voted the measures down and lobbied other senators for Beijing. Biden said at the time that
amendments covering such diverse issues as POW/MIA cooperation, forced labor, organ harvesting, etc. pile too much onto this legislation.
Makes sense. First you normalize trade, then you worry about the organ harvesting later. Then in 2001, Biden backed China's entry into the World Trade Organization. Maybe that seemed like a good idea at the time. Although a 2018 report to Congress on China's WTO compliance found China was not in compliance. Surprise! For more on how China has violated pretty much all their WTO promises, check out this episode of China Uncensored, Top 5 Trade Promises China Has Broken. Now, although we know how Senator Joe Biden voted with respect to China in the early 2000s, once he became Obama's vice president in 2008, it's a little trickier to comment on how he handled China. As vice president, Joe Biden worked closely with China and Chinese leader Xi Jinping, but he was doing that at the behest of President Obama. We don't know what Biden would have done if he was president and calling the shots. But according to the New York Times, Obama gave Mr. Biden, his vice president, the role of cultivating Mr. Xi, then China's leader in waiting. Mr. Biden boasts about having spent more time with the Chinese leader than any other foreign official, saying the two had 25 hours of private meals and logged 24,000 miles of travel together. Now sure, at the time, a lot of people hoped that Xi Jinping would reform China. Turned out, he reformed it into a dictatorship. The FBI now says the whole of Chinese society is a threat to the U.S. The Chinese Communist Party has infiltrated all levels of U.S. society, including classrooms. How did that happen? Well, Vice President Joe Biden and President Obama had actually kind of pushed for this. I'll show you how after the break. Welcome back. When Joe Biden was vice president, he pushed for more integration with China. Here's Biden at China's Sichuan University in 2011.
In order to cement this robust partnership, we have to go beyond close ties between Washington and Beijing, which we're working on every day. Go beyond it to include all levels of government. Go beyond it to include classrooms and laboratories, athletic fields, and boardrooms.
Sounds great. But can we also get China involved in the U.S. military too?
That's why it's also important that our military leaders work together, get to know one another. Not just our political leaders, but our military leaders.
Awesome! And after the Tiananmen Square massacre, the U.S. put pretty tight export restrictions on China. You don't want sensitive technology from the U.S. getting into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party's military, am I right?
Already, we have made thousands of new items available for export to China for exclusive civilian use that were not available before, some of which require a license while others don't, and tens of thousands of more items will become available very soon. That's a significant change in our export policy and a rejection of those voices in America that say we should not export that kind of technology for civilian use in China. We disagree, and we're changing.
Well, that's just for civilian use. Except now, the Chinese Communist Party talks about civil-military fusion. So nothing is for exclusive civilian use in China anymore. Over the years as vice president, Joe Biden worked toward bringing China and the United States closer together. Here's Biden with Xi Jinping at a 2011 U.S.-China Business Roundtable.
President Obama and I, we welcome, encourage, and see nothing but positive benefits flowing from direct investment in the United States from Chinese businesses and Chinese entities. It means jobs. It means American jobs.
It didn't. But Biden still hadn't figured that out a year later. Here he is at another U.S.-China Business Roundtable in 2012.
We believe that a rise in China is a positive development, not only for China, but also for the United States and the world.
Wow. I've never seen such a big smile from Xi Jinping. Must be all the time he and Biden were spending together. There's more. In 2013, the Obama administration allowed Chinese companies to invest in U.S. capital markets without having their books inspected by U.S. regulators, after meetings between Chinese officials and Biden. Guess how that turned out? Chinese companies used that loophole to cheat U.S. investors. As vice president, Biden got Chinese leader Xi Jinping to let more Hollywood movies into the country. Great! And the more promising the China market looks, the more Hollywood self-censors to get access. So Vice President Joe Biden didn't seem to have a clue who he was dealing with. But presidential candidate Joe Biden understands China. I'm a little unclear what his specific plans are. On his website, he says the world is facing inescapable challenges, including a rising China. That seems to be the only mention of China in his campaign platform. He has said he wants to get tough on China, but he doesn't support Trump's trade tariffs. That's because, in his view, they've hurt the U.S. more than China. And while Trump has been threatening to decouple the U.S. and Chinese economy, a Biden advisor says that's unrealistic. So what will Biden do about the billions of dollars worth of China tariffs? He's been unclear.
Made it real
So
clear.
if you scrap those tariffs, what do you want in return? Or are you just going to scrap them without any concessions?
No, here's the deal. The question is, what is the appropriate behavior that they have to engage in international trade with us? And they have to play by the international rules. And what we have done is we have disarmed ourselves. We make up 25% of the world's economy, but we poked our finger in the eye of all of our allies out there. The way China will respond is when we gather the rest of the world that, in fact, believes in open trade and making sure that we're in a position that the world that we deal with WHO the right way. That in fact, that's when things begin to change. That's when China's behavior is going to change.
So what I gathered from that is Biden isn't going to say what he'll do about tariffs. But he is critical of how Trump has handled the relationship with U.S. allies. For instance, Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That was a trade pact Obama had negotiated with the intention of getting Pacific economies together to counter China. Biden has said he would renegotiate it. And I don't want to give you the idea the Obama administration did nothing to counter China. In 2011, Obama announced a pivot to Asia. He had the U.S. Navy challenge China's claims in the South China Sea by sending warships there on freedom of navigation operations. Trump agreed with that. And in fact, Trump increased the number of freedom of navigation operations. But by and large, the Obama administration and Vice President Biden focused on having smooth relations with China and increasing trade. Now, presidential candidate Biden is talking tough on China. But will President Biden actually change his actions on China if he gets elected in 2020? It's hard to say. But we can look to his potential advisors for clues. One of Biden's foreign policy advisors is Eli Ratner. He was one of Vice President Biden's deputy national security advisors from 2015 to 2017. He's been saying the U.S. must forget America first to counter China. And he's also been saying the U.S. should focus less on forcing China to change and more on being, quote, a more confident United States. In August, he said, "The China challenge right now is about us. It's not about them. It's about our own competitiveness." Another potential Biden administration advisor is Susan Rice. She was Obama's former national security advisor. And she's been pushing to become Biden's Secretary of State or Defense. How would she treat China? Well, she very much follows the Henry Kissinger school of thought on China, engagement. Basically, Susan Rice seems to want the status quo we've had for decades. Don't rock the boat, don't upset the Chinese leadership. But the realities have changed. There is broad bipartisan consensus that the Chinese Communist Party is a threat. Obviously, Biden has criticized the Chinese Communist Party's forced detention of Uyghurs, calling it unconscionable. He's also said the free world must unite in the face of China's high-tech authoritarianism. If only the U.S. hadn't helped the Chinese regime build that high-tech authoritarian system by selling sensitive U.S. technology to Chinese companies for civilian use. So Biden has been much softer on China in the past, but now he's toughened his stance. But will that translate into policy? Or will the Biden administration bring a reset to U.S.-China relations? Now, according to the National Counterintelligence and Security Center, a U.S. government agency, China wants Joe Biden to win. I can't imagine why.
They're not bad folks.
But I mean, is that really true? I consulted the mainstream media and found out that, in fact, China wants Trump to win. They're rooting for Trump to win. Beijing would prefer Trump over Biden, and Trump is Beijing's best asset. I feel like I'm watching Batman versus Superman again, and nothing makes sense. And this episode has been sponsored by Surfshark. Whenever you go online, you should be using a VPN, like Surfshark, to protect your identity, because governments and your internet service provider may be watching you. And besides protecting your identity, there's another advantage to using a VPN. You can access websites that are only available in other countries. For example, let's say you want to watch Batman vs. Superman, but you can't access it on Netflix in the US. So you use Surfshark to switch your location to France, log in again, and there it is. And you may find out that Batman and Superman have more in common than you first thought. And if you don't want to watch Batman vs. Superman, there's tons of other movies and TV shows that you can only watch if you're logged into Netflix in another country by using a VPN like Surfshark. And with one account, you can connect as many devices as you want. Try it out with a 30-day money-back guarantee. And Surfshark has a special discount for America Uncovered fans. Go to surfshark.com/uncovered and use the code UNCOVERED to get our special deal that includes 3 extra months for free. Click the link below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.